Hey guys, hope you're all having a great day. In today's video, I want to show you the gardens at my mom's and my dad's houses for August of 2023 and just see how everything is shaping up. So starting off at the front stairs at my mom's house, we have this Japanese maple right here, which does look a little bit different. We removed the boxwood hedge that was here and then just trimmed back this Japanese maple a little bit. It'll free up some space. The boxwoods were not honestly all that healthy. And then just the other day, I planted a raspberry splash lungwort right in this spot. So this will start to fill in. Back over here, we also have these euonymus that we ended up spraying because they had scale on them. And then I also trimmed them and shaped them as I wanted to and cut out any dead. That's why there's a little bit of a hole there and some other holes in that one. But hopefully that new growth will kind of cover up all those dead spaces. Moving over to the front of the house, you can see that we do have a couple of containers here. This is the Coffee Cups Colocasia, which I was expecting to do a little bit better, but for whatever reason, it has been burning a little bit. Not too sure exactly why. I don't know if it's from over or under watering, maybe too much fertilizer. We have apricot begonias here, which I think these containers have just been staying too wet this year because we've had so much moisture. It's actually been hard to let these dry out. So apricot begonias and then white stream lobularia. This looked wonderful for the springtime. When it got hot in the summer, it didn't look all that great, but it is starting to rebound now. But this is the better of the two containers. This one, actually, one of the begonias died twice. I ended up replacing it and both of them rotted out. So I think they've just been staying too wet, but I think I might do a different mix next year, something that can tolerate a little bit more wet conditions. I also have a hibiscus here. This one actually hasn't flowered for me yet, but I wanted to get it because of the beautiful pink leaves that it has. So I really love this plant. And then there was an osteospermum here that I ended up taking out. You'll see it later on in this video for how much I ended up cutting it back because it just was looking a little sad. This area over here hasn't changed too much, just that this plant ended up dying basically to the ground this year. This is, I think, a Silver King euonymus. I'm actually going to take this out and probably put it in a different spot of the garden and replace it with some other evergreen that'll kind of fill up this hole for those other two euonymus. And there's a lot going on here. It's very busy, so I want to take out a little bit of the variegation and just plant like a nice green or maybe bluish color plant. We've got a Gara here, just a white flowering one. I'm not sure of the specific variety, but it's just been starting to bloom. I think this plant is technically a zone 7 and we're in a zone 6, but it did make it over the winter, which is awesome. This hosta is going to come out because it's actually growing into this Dwarf Alberta spruce and ended up creating somewhat of a hole here. So I'll take this out. I do have some heuchera, which I'll show you as well, that's going to go in this space here and just simplify this space and kind of fill up any gaps that are in here. Same thing with this lamb's ear. It actually grew a lot from when I planted it last fall, but I think I'll end up dividing this plant and then spreading it out in a couple of other spots. We've got this container here, which has a beautiful Silver Falls. There we go. Dichondra Silver Falls right here. And then I also have these Selenia yellow begonias, which have been doing okay in this container. I actually did a repeat from last year, but again, the begonias they've been weird this year. So at least the Silver Falls looks nice. Honestly, it may be nice to just do Silver Falls next year in that spot. Over here, I have the Limelight hydrangea tree. This actually lost a huge limb last year, so I did have to cut it back pretty hard, and it's getting a better shape this year. However, if I walk onto the other side, you can see kind of what's been happening back over here. It has had some drooping branches, so I think this fall I'm going to cut it back even harder, really shape it together, because these do like to grow a lot in one season, and when they do grow a whole lot and they aren't densely branched, that seems to happen. So I'm going to cut these back nice and hard, and then hopefully it'll be a nice ball shape for next year and not be as kind of crazy as it is this year, but still looking much, much better from last year. It also was leaning last year, so it does look good. I want to head over to underneath this maple tree here just to show you this bed. This bed we kind of put in last year in the spring, and I've learned a lot since then. I realized that these plants have been stressed from all of the maple roots. They didn't have a lot to grow into. So we've got all gold Hakanakloa. We've got 3 Japanese forest grasses. This is a variety called Godzilla, so it's supposed to get quite large over time. But again, just starting to grow in, just starting to fill in this spot. These are actually all new leaves that it's pushed out in the last couple months. Right here is a Silver Run Leucothoe. This one's done okay. It put on a little bit of growth this year, but I'm hoping next year it'll grow even more. I did put a thick layer of mulch down this year, which will help, but I think in the spring next year, I want to side dress with some compost. Right here, I have 4 heuchera. I actually don't know the specific variety, but they're beautiful because they're a nice deep purple and they're speckled with this pink. It actually reminds me of like a pink princess philodendron. This leaf in particular has a lot of pink happening in it. You can see how much pink there is at the bottom there. So I do really like the way that these heuchera look. We did have 2 Brunnera here. This one didn't come back, and this one I just transplanted the other day. So you'll see where that ended up going. But let's walk back up over here, and I'll show you the rest of this bed here. I forgot to mention that there's some lavender. I think it's Provence lavender that I have underneath there. We did end up making this bed wider too, so I'm gonna end up transplanting those in the fall and either keep them here and just move them out more, or I may end up moving them entirely and doing something else around this hydrangea. I'll see what I feel like doing in the fall. But this area over here, this is one of the first areas that we did work on when we got this house in 2020. I think we did this in 2021 though. We've got variegated silvergrass here. They came out a little sparse this year, but they're looking pretty good now, especially this one. There's 2 of the pink knockout roses. They initially had a beautiful bloom in June that lasted for pretty much the whole month. I did end up cutting them back, and they're just starting to push out new buds and blooms again. So they're starting to look pretty good. I have a red cone Norway spruce here. This one half defoliated when we first planted it a couple years ago. It pushed out growth last year. It pushed out a ton of growth this year. In fact, you can see like all this is just growth from this year. I did stake them up so that way I can make sure that they have a more upright appearance, at least for the next year or 2, and then I'll kind of let it do what it wants. But this will fill up this space nicely. Hopefully next year we'll get some red cones from that. And then right here, here, and here, I have 2 of the same plant. I just repeated these, and these I just put in the ground about a week ago. This is a Cat's Pajamas Nepeta or catmint. So you can see like it doesn't have the shape that it normally would have just because I just put it in the ground. So I think it'll start to grow a little bit this year, and next year for sure it'll really push out a lot of growth. But this is a smaller growing catmint. It's not going to get too big. And then this is a type of yarrow. I forget exactly the variety name, but it's firefly something. It has a nice pink color that kind of fades, like a darker pink that fades to a light pink. And I think these 3 plants will really match well together and have a nice pink and purple theme going on. So I have the same thing here, and that's pretty much it for this bed. So now we will head into the backyard. So I just walked through this gate here, and on this corner of the fence line here is a Bracken's Brown Beauty Southern Magnolia. This is a beautiful evergreen magnolia that is hardy to a zone 6, but not really any colder than that. And it has some beautiful dark brown underneath on the leaves. I think the new foliage will push out an even more like dark brown color, which I really do love. And it does give a nice tropical look to this magnolia, or to this whole area, which will continue on with the tropical bed right here. So I just wanted to mention this tropical bed that I ended up planting. It is symmetrical, so I just want to walk out and show you the whole thing first so you can kind of see the look of all of it. Right in the center, we have a hibiscus. There's 2 more hibiscus behind it, 2 bananas, 2 camellias, 2 sedum, and 2 needle palms. I also have space to put probably 1 more thing in between the needle palm and the camellias, but let's take a look at each one of these plants just so you can see. Now, supposedly all of these are hardy to zone 6, so this will be a really fun experiment, but I did put a few of these plants in this season. This is the needle palm I was talking about. It stays as more of like a shrubbier type of palm. It doesn't really grow to be like a tree, but I have seen reports of this surviving in zones 5 and 6, so this will be a fun experiment. I also want to see exactly how I need to protect this, or if I need to protect it in the winter time, especially for the first couple of seasons. But this should be a fun plant to see. Right here is a frosted fire sedum. It's just starting to bud up. In fact, I actually just transplanted these. They have a beautiful variegated color, and then these will bloom like a nice pinkish red in the next couple of weeks and hold on to that color for the fall. This is a camellia. It's a specific one from Monrovia. Camellias are not typically hardy in our area, but this is called, it's a part of their Ice Angels collection called Winter Snowman, so it's gonna have some white flowers. And I'm still new to camellias, but I'm curious, I've noticed this recently. It started to put these little structures out, and I'm curious to know if maybe those are flower buds. I don't know if these are gonna bloom in the fall, like late fall into winter, or if it's supposed to be late winter into spring, but I guess we're gonna find out, and I'm curious to see if those are flower buds or not. Behind here is 2 of the same hibiscus. These are called ballet slippers. Yeah, I think these are called ballet slippers. So 1 and 2, that's right here. This one is just starting to open up. So you can see how beautiful the flowers are on this, and definitely massive, nice dinner plate hibiscus. And then the one that's in front of it here, this one was planted a lot longer. Like, this has been in the ground for 3 or 4 years. These I just planted last fall. But this is called Cherry Chocolate. You can see it has a nice deep pink color and beautiful flowers on these. So this one's going to be a little bit more floriferous with flowering, just because it's more settled into its spot. But these are all budded up, and they definitely are going to continue blooming for the next probably month or two. These here are the hardy bananas that I have, the Musa Baju, which I've made a couple of videos on if you want to see how I protect these over the winter. These are technically hardy to a zone 4 though, and this is a 6-foot fence that we have behind here. So you can see that that banana plant is right at about 6 feet, and this one I would say is closer to 7. And it's only the beginning of August, so we actually still have a good 2 to 2.5 months left of growth. So I think these are going to get pretty large by the end of the season, which I'm very excited to see. So we got the same repeats: camellia, sedum, needle palm. I did actually plant a whole row of sunflowers here, and only 2 of them survived. We've had a lot of issues with rabbits and woodchucks and that kind of stuff. So these are the only 2 that have made it. I don't know the specific variety. This one actually does have a flower bud on it. They're supposed to be pretty large sunflowers, but I think because it kept getting eaten, it is going to flower now, so it may not get a whole lot taller than it is. Maybe put on another foot or 2 of growth. But in front of that here is a My Monet Weigela, which I just planted. You can see the beautiful variegated color that it has. Green and white, but then you can see that the new foliage does have some of that pink as well. It reminds me a lot of that penstemon, which I just realized I hadn't shown you yet, so you will see that at the end of the video. But then in front of it here is a Roseanne geranium. This is like a very small plant that I found at the garden center, just like way in the back. So it's an experiment. I'm gonna see if it survives, but just give it a year or 2 and we'll see how this comes back at that time. I've got a limelight hydrangea that I just put in, just a standard limelight. This one will end up getting about 8-ish feet tall and wide, so it'll really fill up this spot here. And the My Monet Weigela, because it's so variegated, can burn easily if it's in full sun. So because this is south facing, as this continues to grow, it'll hopefully shade out that Weigela just enough to the point where it won't burn. But honestly, we've had temperatures in like the mid 80s the last couple weeks that this has been in the ground, and I haven't seen any burning yet. And it was in full sun when it was at the garden center. So not too concerned, but it's always good to play safe than sorry. We've got some open space here that still needs to be filled because all this is new for this year. None of this was actually planted here, except for a couple of tropicals that I did have. But I do have a little dahlia patch that I started here. These are just annuals in my climate, so they're not going to make it over the winter. But it is nice to see some flowers here. This is a cafe au lait that just has never flowered for whatever reason, just put on a lot of growth. We'll see if I get any flowers by the end of the season. But the 6 others that are here are all called Lavender Perfection. These are actually tubers I got at Home Depot, and they look really nice. So they've been growing pretty nicely the last couple months. This is a more open one, so you can see kind of the size that they end up putting on, but I love the color of these. I haven't been the best with staking them, but they've been holding up pretty well. Right here is a Kwanzan flowering cherry that I do need to lift, because if you see, it was planted too low, and that's because I planted it before there was a bed here. So now I know once it goes dormant for the winter, I'm gonna lift it up out of the ground and give it like a good foot of growth, so that way it doesn't end up getting covered and it has a nice root flare in the end. There's a few plants I got here from Garden for Wildlife that they sent out to me. This is my little like native plant section that I have. So these are, I forget what the name is that they called them. I just know them as bee balm or Monarda, but this is like the wild type or the native type. So they were little plugs when I first got them, but it's put on a lot of growth. The other one actually has put on a lot more growth from this one, but a nice pinkish flower. These did not come in that order, but these are Golden Jubilee Akastaki, which look horrible right now. They look horrendous, but it's because they were totally eaten up by Japanese beetles. And now I know that I need to preventatively take care of this for next season. So good learning experience, but now I know. Right here is one plant. This is what originally came on the plant, and then it put out this growth. So it's doing okay, but I think next year it'll be a lot bigger. But that is the same thing as this plant here, which is called Great Blue Lobelia. And you can see that it has a nice blue color. This one has done better this year, but these are a smaller plant compared to the rest. So that's why I put it towards the front. And then over here is that other Monarda or bee balm. You can see this is the original stem that was kind of all floppy, and this is all the growth that it's put out this year. And I just planted these, I think at like the end of June, beginning of July. So they've really actually grown quite a bit for this season for not being planted early in the spring. We have a Nepeta here, or catmint. I think this is called like Whisper Pink or something like that. It's a beautiful pink catmint, which I hadn't seen before. And because I know that we have a lot of rabbit and groundhog issues, I'm only planting stuff that is for sure rabbit resistant. And if it's deer resistant, that's just another positive. So this has been doing well. We have this hydrangea here. This is a Summer Crush Endless Summer hydrangea. I did transplant this early in the spring because it was in too shady of a spot before, so now it's in full sun. I just need to make sure I water it every day. And it finally is putting out a bloom that has some beautiful color to it. Next here is, I don't know if this is like ornamental oregano. I think that's what this is called. I don't remember the specific name of this variety. It does send out some really nice flowers that are kind of like upside down. It's burned a little bit here, or it's kind of just like past its prime at this point. It doesn't get much bigger than it is now, but I'm thinking next year when it sends out, all of its new growth, it'll look really gorgeous and just fill up this nice little corner. I've still got some weeding to do and that kind of stuff, but this is a whole new bed for this year. So, it's definitely a work in progress, but it's actually filled in quite nicely so far. Swinging over to this side, we've got this back bed over here. Now, this is what I was talking about with the groundhog and rabbit issues. This was a lavender chiffon Rose of Sharon. It was a small one to begin with, but it was probably about this tall. It had a bunch of leaves on it. It actually had flower buds. And 2 days after I planted it, this is what happened to it. So it's just sticks. I'm not expecting it to come back. I don't really care either. I can just plant something else here. But a good learning experience, that's for sure. Right here is a Dragon's Eye Japanese red pine. Beautiful variegation in it. You can see how cool the needles look. And let me show you actually towards the bottom, because you can get a better example of, it's like a nice, two-tone look where half of it's white, half of it's green. It put out a bunch of growth this year. I did just plant it in probably late April, early May. And you can see how beautiful that structure is. So it'll be a nice variegated look, a nice evergreen in the winter time, and it's gonna fill up this entire spot. It's a smaller growing pine in the end, but it still will get pretty large in the end. So I wanted to give it as much space as possible to fill out. We don't really walk a whole lot back here anyways, so I just wanna fill it up with nice stuff that you can especially see from a distance. This was a 9-bark. That's a fun experiment. I found this seedling growing in a pot at the garden center, so I took it home with me and just planted it the other day. I don't know the specific variety, but my assumption is it's probably like a standard 9-bark that'll end up getting a good 8 to 10 feet tall and wide. So it'll really fill up this spot. And because it has that purple bronzy color, this will tie nicely with this, having those two together. Nothing else is in this bed until we get to the Samsonia here. This is a nice flower that'll it'll end up blooming blue flowers in the spring, kind of mid to late spring. This was actually a cutting that I got from URI, the university that I go to, and I just planted this a couple weeks ago, so we'll see how that does for next year. This back corner is just green giant arborvitaes to fill up this back space. And this actually stays pretty shaded for the whole day, mostly because our neighbors have a fully mature river birch there. So we initially put roses here. They did not do well at all. Good learning experience. And then what we ended up planting was this I started in my propagation class at URI. These are a type of red osier or red twig dogwood. You can see they've actually put on a lot of growth because they were little sticks when I started them in March, but they've put on a lot of growth. I think I'm going to cut them back this year so that way they are a little bit bushier for next year and aren't so much just like twigs. But you can see that nice red color that they will have in the winter. So I figured having red shrubs, which these will get big, these will get like a good 6, 7, 8 feet tall and wide. Having the red backed with the nice dark green will look really nice in the winter, especially from a distance. Moving over this way, there's not really anything over here. This is just grass for now. We'll see what we want to do in the future. But I did create this island, and this birch tree is actually the first thing that we planted when we moved in 2020. And I've really struggled with it every year. It's gotten birch blight really bad. I also realized that I planted it way too deep. You can see where the graft line is, and this is about where I did have it planted for a couple years. So it's no wonder why this ended up struggling. So this is where I planted it, just because I know it was blurry. So I lifted it up this spring. It's done okay so far, but I did lift it kind of late. But I figured late is better than never. And we'll see. If it comes back nicely next year, we'll keep it. If it looks like this next year, it's coming out. And I'm gonna plant something that I really want in this spot. So we'll see how it does. I'm gonna give it one more year, and we'll see if it comes back. Over here I have Arantiaca orange California poppies, or actually just one plant that I started from winter sowing. And this is beautiful. It actually closes its flowers at night and opens them back up, or it might be like a single day flower. I'm actually not too sure about these. Beautiful color. I love the like pale orange that these have. And I planted this in May and it has not stopped blooming ever since. This also is one plant and it's actually gotten quite large. Like here's the size of my hand. So if that gives you some sort of scale of how big this plant actually is, it's probably a good 3 feet across and maybe 2 feet long because it's a little oblong. This is a Jimbourne Beauty false cypress. Beautiful, or Hinoki cypress. The juvenile foliage on these plants has a really nice bluish color, like a glaucous color to it, which I really like. And then as it starts to mature, it has a little less blue in it. It still has some blue underneath on the cross hatching, but you can see it has a nice character. I mean, Hinoki cypresses are one of the best plants that you can plant, at least in our area. This will get about 15 feet tall, 12 feet wide. It'll have kind of a Christmas tree shape to it, and it'll really fill up the space nicely, and a beautiful evergreen. I've got my little veggie patch here, some tomatoes that are planted. I just transplanted that tomato so I could plant this smoke bush here. This is a Winecraft black smoke bush. Beautiful purple color. There's a lot of greens and other things like that happening in this garden, so I want to add some more purple in, some deeper colors to help contrast everything else. I do like a lot of contrast in the garden, so that's what my goal is. This will end up getting about 10 feet tall, maybe 8 to 10 feet wide, and it'll just fill up this whole spot and look nicely against that Jimbourne Beauty Hinoki cypress, and then either if the birch stays here or whatever else. If you have any suggestions, let me know. Back over here, this is the last bed that we're going to be working on. This is definitely a work in progress. It definitely will be a lot of work to kind of finish this off because I still need to cut the bed, and I got a large pile of mulch that was delivered and wanted to get it out of the driveway. Oh, Camus here. That's our neighborhood cat. He likes to hang out in our yard a lot, actually. But yeah, so we have mulch here, and as I continue to make this bed and cut it out, I'm going to be adding in this mulch, and then we'll plant some other plants in here besides what's already here. The one thing is that's been kind of my compost pile for when we've been getting rid of grass for beds and working on whatever. So I'm going to keep that open for now, and that'll be kind of the last area that we do. If I turn around here, you can see this is actually where our hot tub just went in. We did end up getting a hot tub this season. It's just on a pad right now, but the idea for what we're going to do is there is crushed bluestone, which actually we'll just take a walk over there and I'll show you. This is what the crushed bluestone looks like. It's just like a 3/4 inch chip. You can see that there. And I want to repeat that crushed bluestone, same thing too with these pavers, I think with these pavers anyways. Do it as like a 3 or 4 foot radius around this hot tub. So we'll get rid of the grass, it'll be a lot less messy. There'll be a flower bed here where I can put some small, maybe annuals or just some small growing perennials. Not anything too crazy, so we can still access underneath here. And then I just planted these hibiscus here. These are a variety called Edge of Night. I just planted them probably last week. They have a beautiful dark purple leaf. They're also a smaller growing hibiscus compared to the other ones that I have in the garden already. No blooms open on them yet, but they are budded up, and these are gonna have a nice deep pink color. And I think having the deep pink as well as the dark purple leaves up against the very light blue house that we have, these are really gonna stand out and contrast nicely. So that's pretty much it for this area, but I can show you some of the pots that we have. This is just one of our house plants. It's just a bird of paradise that I've had for a number of years now, so it's gotten pretty large. And I probably should up pot it because you can see the size of this plant compared to the pot that it's in is kind of crazy. This is a Musa Dwarf Cavendish banana in this pot, which has put on a ton of growth from this spring. I finally was able to repot this into something larger. It's doing really well now. We have an olive tree here, which I did stake up because this was a mess of a plant a few months back, and I think I need to get a stronger stake for it because the stake actually, oh, it snapped. Okay, so that's what happened. Yeah, so I definitely need to work on this, get a stronger stake for this, but I will say the olive tree is looking very nice now compared to before. I have an avocado tree, or a group of them right here. These always struggle. When I bring them inside for the winter, bring them outside for the summer, it's just kind of a bit of a shock. So I'll work on shocking them less for next year. But they staked up and they are staked up and they're starting to grow better now. Moving over here, there are some Oh So Easy Italian Ice roses, which I'll show you what those flowers look like. These again, I planted these a little bit later, so they did flower, but they flowered later in the season, so they're kind of rebounding now, and then hopefully they'll continue to flower. But this plant right here is starting to bloom again, lots of buds on it. What's beautiful about them is they start off as this like nice yellow color. Then they fade to have some pinks in it, and then they end up being a nice pink in the end. But lots of color. They're actually pretty fragrant as well, and they stay on the smaller side. It's just that all of our roses have been eaten up so badly by either rabbits or groundhogs. So I just want to keep this fenced in until they get a little bit larger, and then we'll see what happens with these. Behind it here, this is a nice ornamental tree. I guess you can call it a tree. I'm going to limb it up so it looks like one. This is called a longstalk holly, Ilex pedunculosa. This one is a specific cultivar called Frosty Morn. I really like it because it looks like a ficus to me, but it is hardy in a zone 6. I don't know, it may be hardy to like a zone 4 or 5, but this will end up getting about 20-ish feet tall, 15 feet wide, but it'll fill up this space nicely. And then on the other side here is a Japanese umbrella pine, which will be like a nice Christmas tree shape. So there'll be 2 evergreens on either side of this deck, which will fill in these corners, but 2 different shapes, so you get a little bit of contrast with those as well. Now what we have around the deck for annuals are 2 elephant ears. They're a variety called Mammoth. I actually got these from Home Depot, and I can't believe how big they've gotten this year. I mean, if you look at the size of the leaves, like, I know this is probably not a good example, but here's my hand and here's the leaf. It's just kind of crazy what they ended up doing this year. But those won't come back after this year. And then we have King Tut grasses right here. I actually think I want to replace these pots and maybe put like a little lime punch hydrangea or something like that here for some later season color. But they do look beautiful. I do like how we have these containers here for now. I know the King Tuts were a little too big. I probably could have gone for a Prince Tut, but I just wanted to try it out anyways and see what these looked like. So they've been growing beautifully this year. I've actually had to cut out some growth because they've gotten so big that they've gotten too top heavy, but they look pretty good right now. I also have some Russian sage. That was an absolute garden fail. They weren't doing all that well during the season, so I figured, oh, let me take them out. I'll give them some compost, just kind of revive them. And I learned that Russian sage do not like the roots to be touched while they are growing. This is the only one that has like the tiniest bit of green still in it, so we'll see if this one makes it. But I think I'm just going to end up replacing these with something else here. I do have a little stockpile of plants underneath the deck here of future plants that are going in. This is just kind of the way that I've been working things out. So I have some heucheras here. These are the ones that are going in the front. These are amaryllis that I originally had as Christmas presents. So I'm going to leave these. This one's actually about to start blooming again, which I think is really funny. And then we have 3 hostas here. There's a painter's palette persica here. This is going to go in the shade bed along with those hostas, and then just a few other random things. Some of them are just projects that I worked on in school. Like you can see, these are some blue hollies that I propagated. So you can kind of see what these look like. Put on a lot of growth, and I'll have to find some sort of spot to put all of these in, and then just a couple other random things like Japanese maples, that kind of stuff. But let's take a look at what's on the deck, and then the last thing we'll do is finish off in the front. So I mentioned that roses have been eaten up in our garden. These are the 6 roses that I had to take out of the ground, otherwise they would have been totally mangled. But there's 3 At Last roses, 3 Oh So Easy Double Pink. I also have lantana in containers here. Now, this one variety I think was mislabeled. It looks really beautiful. In fact, I actually would grow this variety again over the other ones because it seems to be a little more floriferous with blooming. But I've got lemongrass in the middle, 2 lantana plants. I have this pot here, this pot here, this pot here. This is an Oradano Nishiki Japanese maple that I'm trying to revive that I found at the garden center. It was just like down in the back and looked horrible, so I cut off the dead on it. But it's beautiful because it has some leaves that are like basically pure white, some that have pink in them, but I think it also has kind of fried being in the full sun on the deck, so I do have to give it some protection for next year. This I'm just going to keep in a pot for now, and I think it'll be a nice container tree. These are some of my houseplants that I decided to bring out for the summertime just to kind of revive them. Some of them really like being outside. Some of them I realized was not the best idea to do, or they just had to get used to being outside. And this is that osteospermum I was talking about that I had to take out from the front, and I just cut it way back. It does have some growth points. We'll see if it ends up filling in for the fall, and maybe I can bring it back out front over there. But it definitely is going to be an interesting experiment. So we'll see how this does. I do have a eucalyptus. This is just a traditional spiral eucalyptus. It was a little stick when I first put it in the ground in May, so it's filled out pretty nicely. I have a palm here that we've had for the last couple of years. This one has overwintered pretty nicely and has put on a lot of growth this year. I have a dead citronella, so don't look at that. I have a basil here, and then this is 3 Fire Away Hot and Heavy peppers. My mom does like to have hot peppers, so this is the little plant we've kept on the deck here. And the last thing is just this poor tomato. A lot has happened with this tomato. It is putting out fresh growth though, so we'll see if it does end up producing some more tomatoes for the fall, but I probably should just harvest these and then let it do its thing. So I'm gonna head back out to the last part of the front yard and then we'll head over to my dad's. So just for reference, I was up on the deck over here. These are the hibiscus that are by the hot tub, and then I'm just walking out to the front yard on the other side of the driveway. This bed that we created this year, I did plant some bare root ferns, but they never came up, so I'll have to find something else that can fill in this spot here. Then we have another limelight hydrangea tree. This one is in a lot more shade. It actually does pretty well, in my opinion, for being in like almost full shade, but it's always behind the other tree by a couple of weeks. It's just starting to bloom up now. It always gets a little bit leggier, so I have to cut this one back quite a bit more. We've got some hellebores here that I ended up transplanting this spring. I have a Brunnera that I just transplanted. This was underneath the maple tree that's right there. So I transplanted that here just the other day. And then these are 3 white feather hostas. They are supposed to come up in the spring with a beautiful white leaf, and then I think it eventually fades to green. But I planted these in the middle of May. Then we got an unexpected, very late season frost that basically took all the leaves off of this, and this has been all new growth since then, so it's actually done pretty well. So I think they're gonna be happy in this spot, but we'll have to see next year what these actually end up looking like. I'm gonna turn the camera around and just show you this forsythia hedge that we share with our neighbors. This actually was cut down to nothing, just the stubs as a rejuvenation prune, because these haven't bloomed in the last few years. And they've put on 5 to 6 feet of growth this year, which is kind of crazy to see how much this forsythia hedge actually has grown. This is the last bed that I ended up creating. There was 2 butterfly bushes that were already here from last season. This is a Miss Molly butterfly bush, and I planted them in the fall. It got super cold after being a pretty mild winter, and it basically killed these all the way to the ground. So that's why there's just kind of one stick there. But they've been doing pretty well. They've been reviving and they've grown a lot, and it looks like they're gonna continue flowering for the rest of the season. There's an Incredible hydrangea right here. Everything else besides the butterfly bushes was just planted about a month ago, but the Incredible hydrangea is looking really nice. These are some of the older blooms that are on it, so they developed that like limey color. This is one of the fresher blooms here. This is an Olympus phlox that has just started to go into flower, and it has a nice variegated look to it where it has that nice green and then kind of like a yellowish white as a margin. There's 2 Starship Rose cardinal flowers, or lobelia. You can see the flowers on these look beautiful. These actually do kind of want part shade too, so they get some shade from this amur maple, something like that, during the daytime, but still enough sun for everything else to do well. Pink muhly grass right here. This will develop to some of that like nice pink color later on in the season. So I'm really curious to see how this does and how it comes back next year, but it is rated to a zone 5. So we'll see how that does. And then the last thing in the front here are 3 conga line sedums. These have been holding pretty well. This one looks like it's a little stressed because it has dropped a couple of leaves, but as long as it makes it through this winter, then hopefully next year it'll come back pretty well. And they're just starting to open up now. You can see the beautiful kind of limey green color flowers, and these will kind of envelop the entire plant in the next few weeks. Moving on from this bed, there's just one more thing I wanted to show you, which is our mailbox bed. And you can see right here, I do have some creeping phlox that doesn't look the absolute best. It's just kind of like died out in the middle. So I don't know if I really want to plant any more creeping phlox. I may want to cut this back too, but I want to do some more research before I touch these at all. But they're definitely still alive, so we'll see how these do. And then this is another one of the Oh So Easy double pink roses. This one came back much better, and nothing's really touched it so far, probably because it's more exposed. It bloomed nicely in the spring. I did cut the dead blooms back, and it's just starting to bloom again. So hopefully this will continue blooming for the rest of the season. It's not going to get much bigger than it is now, and I think it looks really nice right where this mailbox is. So that's pretty much it for this garden. Now we're gonna head over to my dad's. Okay, so we're at my dad's. I'm currently in the backyard right by the new deck that we have, and I've got a lot of new stuff to show you here, so let's take a walk around. So starting off, this is the view right behind where I was standing. We've got 3 chocoholic snake roots, a really cool dark leafed and tall plant that does well in the shade. You can see that they are all budded up and they're just gonna start blooming, hopefully in the next couple weeks or so. We planted these back a couple months ago, and they've really put on a lot of size since then. We have the hose here, and then this bed that we kind of created, which there's nothing in now. I think we're gonna put some sort of larger shrub right here, but we're not entirely sure what we wanna put yet. So that might go in this year, maybe not till next year, we'll see. We've got Brunnera here. I don't know the specific variety of this one, but nice full leaves. There's a second one in front. These actually might be transplanted soon. We'll see what happens. And then the rest of this is kind of a shady section of the garden bed. My dad also liked to pop in some random sunflowers everywhere, so you'll kind of see that's a common theme, just something that he likes to do. And there's also this beautiful sunflower here. I don't know the specific variety on this, but you'll see a couple more flowers popping up. We've got 3 autumn frost hostas, Mighty Pip Astilbe, which has already bloomed out, but you can still see it has the nice structure of the blooms here. So it still looks nice even after they are bloomed out, just to have that, that height in a shadier spot. We've got a fern here. Not sure of the variety of this. We've had this one for a few years. Very upright growth though. There's one here and there's one on the other side. This one looks like it's even a little bit bigger actually. And then right here are 3 raspberry splash lungworts. And this is actually where that other lungwort came from. It was a little baby that was kind of growing off the side to this one. We've got the row of green giant arborvitaes. We put these in a while ago, and since we actually took out a couple pines here last year, these have put on a lot more growth this year. You can see like this one in particular, it does have some height going to it. This is the most they've grown any year that we've had them in the ground. So I think that's about a 4-foot fence. So they're getting to be, I would say a lot of them are about probably a good 5-6 feet tall now, and then even approaching 7 feet. So this wall is starting to look nice. I don't think we're gonna prune any of these this year, but the other arborvitaes we will, and you'll see that. Euonymus here, possibly Silver King, but maybe not. Not entirely sure on the variety of this one. That we got a long time ago. Couple of lavender, which we might either remove or end up putting somewhere else. They're doing okay, but not super great. Horstman Blue Atlas Cedar. This one is growing beautifully. It was a very small plant when we put it in the ground last season. I actually had to take out a big branch because it was growing super far out that way and not so much up. But you can see the gorgeous color on this Blue Atlas cedar. And this is a nice compact variety that's not going to get too big. Some more sunflowers, 2 berry poppins, winterberry hollies, and then there's the Mr. Poppins there. You can see that these are just starting to bud up. So you can see all the berries, not bud up, but they're starting to develop all their berries. In the next probably couple months, these are going to start turning red, and they're going to look really beautiful on these 2 shrubs. We have a butterfly bush. This one we actually had to replace from the one that was here last year, but this is a Black Knight, so same variety. We had a very strange winter. A lot of people's butterfly bushes around here didn't come back, but that one is looking pretty good, so hopefully that one will come back next year. And then we've got 5 emerald green arborvitaes. They did get some winter burn. I don't know if I can kind of go through and maybe clean these up a little bit. But they have put on some growth this year, so they're looking pretty good, and they just give us a nice green wall for this back area. Right here is I really wish I remembered the variety name on this one, but Heliopsis perennial sunflower. It has some nice deeper leaves, but because it's in a little more shade, it doesn't stay as purple as when I first got it, but nonetheless still looks pretty. This one is kind of just done blooming for the season. I've got a summer wine 9-bark here. Look at all that fresh growth that just pops out of the top. This one is definitely putting on some size. I would say the tallest point is probably a good 6 feet. This will end up getting maybe about 8 to 10 feet tall and really fill up this entire space. In the back over here is a Firelight hydrangea. This is the one I got from Home Depot last year that was like, I don't know, $17 or something. And it looked really sad when we put it in. But I hacked it all the way back at the beginning of this season, so that way it would grow nice and dense, and you can see it certainly is. So it bloomed, it's starting to turn pink, and then we'll start to get some nice red and burgundy tones in this later on in the season. This is just a dwarf fountain grass. I'm not sure if it's Hameln or Little Bunny or one of those varieties, but a nice small variety. Hasn't put out any plumes yet, but hopefully at some point soon this will. This is a Cheyenne Spear Echinacea, which my dad did try to stake up because it was all kind of splayed out for whatever reason. I think it's just a little too shady for some of these plants here. So they're doing pretty well, but I think because there is still this pine tree, they do get a little bit shaded here. Another autumn frost hosta, some more lavender that I started from seed. This is a beautiful Kousa dogwood that I actually finally got to see blooms on this season. You can see some of the little seed heads that are left behind on that, but I'm happy that I finally got to see some blooms on this. And out of any tree to plant here, this is definitely one of the more shade tolerant ones. It also is getting pretty big now. I would say that's a good maybe 8 feet tall now. I would say so. This is a hot rod switchgrass in the front. You can see it's just starting to develop its little seed heads. Behind it are some black-eyed Susans. I think it's just the variety Goldstrum, possibly. I ended up taking these as little clumps from when I divided some of the other ones that we have. Black Dragon Cryptomeria, not doing hot. It almost didn't make the winter, but there is some fresh growth. I think we're gonna end up taking this out and putting something else here. Not sure exactly what yet, but probably some sort of evergreen that can tolerate a little more shade. Here is a zebra grass that I got from a friend a couple years back, and honestly is growing very well here. This is a Russian sage that my dad planted, and it was doing great for a while, but for whatever reason, it just died like all of a sudden, but it's starting to put some fresh growth in, so we'll see about that. I've got my little balloon here. This is a fern spray gold false cypress. I think it's only supposed to get about 8 feet tall, 6 feet wide. So a nice small evergreen. And again, because it's in a little bit more shade, not much, but a little bit more shade, it's on the greener side than yellow, but I actually kind of like the light green color rather than it being super yellow. There's two types of hydrangeas here. There's smaller hydrangea macrophyllus, and I don't know the specific cultivar of these. This one was like a sad looking plant that somebody returned at the garden center, so I took it home to revive it, and it's doing really well, just hasn't bloomed yet. And then I think actually this is a bloom-struck endless summer hydrangea. Behind here is a Rose of Sharon. This one is blue chiffon. So you can see the nice double flowers there. Still a decent amount of blooms here, and it has actually put on a couple of feet of growth this year, so it's looking pretty good. This will be a nice blue tower as it continues to grow. In the front here, there's just two types, maybe Forever Purple, if that's a variety, but some sort, or maybe one of them is Obsidian. Two types of purple heuchera though. This here is all purple coneflower, a little splayed out. It seems like it just naturally does that, so I think we're gonna have to come up with some sort of staking system for this. But nonetheless, when they do open up at the beginning of July, they do look very pretty. Next to it though is a Temple of Bloom Heptacodium. I just noticed there's a little bit of burning on that branch, so I'm not sure exactly why that's the case. But it looks beautiful this year. It's really starting to develop some good shape to it. You can see that all of its panicles are started to bud up. It's gonna bloom white and then eventually turn to pink, like the calyx will turn pink. So very excited about that to bloom. That's a good more like summer into fall plant. And I did prune it back quite a bit and tried to prune it into a tree. And I think next year it's actually gonna really start to look like an ornamental tree. So very excited about that. Over here we've got blueberry bushes and then corn that my dad planted, as well as this really tall sunflower here. So there's 3 different varieties of blueberries. They've just started to grow. We put them in last year, so they're starting to get some size now. Corn as well, you can see, is just starting to develop its the pollen on the top, and then it'll put out its silks pretty soon. We've got the rest of the veggie garden in this area, which I'm not going to go into detail of all the plants, but cucumbers, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, tomatoes, there's kind of tomatoes all throughout, basil, eggplant, peppers, then there's some marigolds, and then dahlias that are mixed in. And one of my favorite plants is the Black Beauty. So this is a new one for me this year. You can see how dark those tomatoes are, but they are looking pretty cool. And my dad developed this pretty cool staking system for it. As you can see, it kind of looks like a big spider web, but I think it's pretty cool. These are the Green Giant Arborvitaes. This is their, I think we planted them in 2020. So this is like their 4th year in the ground. They were very small plants when we put them in. You can see they're probably approaching a good maybe 10-ish feet at that point right there. So this is gonna be the first year that we're going to cut them back probably to about 8 feet tall. And then if you take a look from this angle, you can see that they're just starting to push over where the grass line is. So I think we're gonna bring it back by about 6 inches or a foot. So that's going to be the story on this arborvitaes. We also have this really large river birch that has grown immensely in the last few years. You can see how large this birch tree is. I would say it's probably approaching a good 15, maybe 18 feet tall at this point. And I think what we're going to end up doing too with this is in the fall, we're going to limit up by quite a bit, probably a good like maybe 3 or 4 feet. So that way it's not growing into all the other plants and we can really start to see the trunk of this tree because it is beautiful. Dark Side of the Moon is Stilby, these 2 plants right over here. And then we have Sensation Honeysuckle, which is just starting to bloom again. And you can see how beautiful those blooms are on it. Love those. Some more lavender here. This is Avignon Early Blue, so a nice small variety. I think this is just a maiden grass. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what this variety was, but it's supposed to get pretty big. I think it's supposed to get like a good 6-7 feet tall. So it was a small plant when we got it, I think only a 1 gallon. It's put on some good size this year. I'm thinking next year it's gonna get pretty big. A variety of yarrow, maybe moonshine, I'm not entirely sure. This one bloomed earlier on, so it's just kind of left its seed heads here, but still has some nice foliage. We just put that in this spring. I just have some Rockin' blue suede shoe salvia there. There's some coleus on the other containers, which I'll show you again. And this bed right here is what we're just developing. So this is I actually can't remember the exact variety of this, but it's a Japanese holly, nice upright variety, and it's supposed to stay, I think, about 6 to 8 feet tall and only about 3 to 4 feet wide. This is an avalanche grass. Not sure exactly why it's kind of browned out. I mean, it's definitely still alive, but I think it maybe got a little water stress or something like that after we planted it. But nonetheless, I think it's going to do pretty well next year. This we just planted yesterday. This is a Pearl Glam, that's the name of this. So Pearl Glam Beautyberry has beautiful white flowers that eventually turn to purple berries in the fall. This gets about 4 to 5 feet tall, 2 to 3 feet wide, so it's going to really fill up this space nicely, but stay on the more narrow side. We have a Bloomstruck Endless Summer Hydrangea that's in this container. Looks really beautiful. Love the blooms on this. Here's some of the new blooms. Here's kind of what the spent blooms look like. They have that kind of purplish color to them, but I really like all stages of this flower, and I love how it has that nice purple color. We're going to keep it in a container for now. I think we're going to try covering it too, so that way it'll hopefully not have the flower buds freeze this year, but we will see. And then I think this is a Buckwood viburnum, if that is a variety. Just trying to remember. It's just kind of like an impulse buy at one point in the spring. And I think it is supposed to be a semi-evergreen to evergreen viburnum that gets about 6 to 8 feet tall and wide. So we'll eventually have to kind of pull this bed, the corner of this bed, out a little bit more, but it'll really fill up this space. This last thing I just want to show you in the backyard are these coleus here. So there's a few varieties. This one actually ended up falling off of the deck somehow. I don't even know how that happened. I think it was from the windstorm that we had. And they're doing pretty well up on this deck, but I think the coleus, I think they actually get a little too much sun, these varieties that are here. I'm back over where the honeysuckles are, just to give you a reference point, and I'm going to turn around over here so you can see this birch tree that I was talking about, and you can see exactly how big this birch tree really is. So you can see there's a tiny bit of the trunk there, but we're going to limb up a few feet of this tree so you can really see underneath and see the plants that are tucked underneath. We also have all this set up still from when we built the deck, and my dad is planning on making a new thing for the stairs here, like putting a wooden cover over these stairs and doing a whole thing here. So like we kind of left these plants because I don't know if these are going to end up staying or if we're going to move this around, so we kind of just let that be for now. And then he's going to be working on this in the next, hopefully, few weeks or so. We've got a pussy willow right here that we've actually been cutting back really severely every year, and you can see it grows a good 4 or 5 feet in a season, so definitely needs to be cut back every year in order to fit in this space. We also have a hinoki cypress. There's one on this side, and it's actually hard to see from the birch tree, but we're waiting on cutting the birch tree so that way the sap doesn't flow. So we'll wait until probably the end of August to September, and then we'll really give this a good cut back, and you'll see a video on this. But we have the hinoki cypresses here that provide a really nice evergreen structure here when all this other stuff loses its leaves. Moving on from here, we've got 5 Karl Forester grasses, which are a little bit taken over by the birch, so you'll be able to see those more in the next few weeks. Columbine that was cut back to the ground after it bloomed really nicely in the spring. This is the Blues Weeping Colorado Blue Spruce that we planted a couple years ago. It's put on a lot of size for this season, looking very nice now. Tiny Wine 9-bark, which is not so tiny. I would say it's probably a good 4, maybe 5 feet tall at this point, so it definitely gets bigger than the tag says, but at the very least, it is a smaller growing 9-bark compared to some of the others. Limelight Hydrangea, looking beautiful as always, really starting to come into its own. It's just finished opening up its blooms, so probably in the next couple weeks we'll start to see some pink tones on this. We have, actually, underneath here, there is a tiny sedum that I have to move out because it's been totally taken over by the hydrangea. But this is a certain variety that I do not remember. I'll put the name on the screen. We have a Forest Pansy Redbud. This one has really started to put on some size. It's put on a lot of growth this year. I would say it's a good 10-ish feet tall, 10 to 12 feet tall. And I think we're gonna limb up a couple branches at the bottom of this as well, so that way it doesn't have branches kind of like that one where it's almost touching the ground. It'll be limbed up just a little bit and start to look like a beautiful tree. We did take out the blue fescue grasses that were here because they really didn't do well after this winter. So I think we're gonna end up putting something else here, and probably something that can do well in a more shady spot. But you can see the beautiful leaves on this redbud. All right, so swinging around to this side, like I said, we had the little cactus garden over here, which has gotten pretty weedy, but we're gonna take care of this whole mess once we finish the stairs there and see, because we might need to take a couple plants out so that way everything can fit in there. And the sedum that I was talking about over here, we're gonna end up moving this over here as well. This has been the main project for this season, has been ripping out everything that was in the front of this house and replacing it with what we have here. So starting off with this plant right here, we have a Japanese white pine. This is the specific variety. I think it's just called Glauca. You can see it has that beautiful blue color to it, and also has some really large pine cones. That's one of the coolest things about this tree, is it will develop these pine cones over time that actually make the branches kind of droop a little bit. So we've got that in the corner here. We've got 2 pink muhly grasses, 1 and 2. These will start to develop some pink tones later on in the season, and then they'll kind of hold on to that structure for the winter time. We've got a show-off forsythia in the back over here, and then on the other side of each side of the stairs, we have Incredible hydrangeas. These actually had all of their flower buds frozen from a really late frost that we had, and thankfully they ended up still flowering, and they flowered pretty well this season. So I'm really excited to see what they end up doing next year, if this is kind of like an afterthought for the flowers. So there's one on this side, another one on this side. We've got 2 Bloomerang dark purple lilacs right here, and these actually are starting to push out some more blooms again. The blooms that they continue to push out are more insignificant compared to the rest of them, but nonetheless, it's still nice to see a little bit of color off of these shrubs even after the springtime. There's 3 blue star junipers here, which have put on a little bit of growth, but kind of just sat for a little bit, but provide some nice evergreen structure. We added in this Northwind switchgrass after we planted everything else, just to kind of fill in this hole that was still here, because right next to it is a blue weeping Alaskan cedar, and this will get kind of big in the end, but until it does start to fill in, especially because it's more of a narrower plant, this one will really fill in this space over here. Moving on to the last section over here, we've got this row of Castle Spire and Castle Wall hollies. The first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are all Castle Spires, which is the female version of this blue holly. You can see the berries right there. And then the last 2 back here are the pollinators. These are the Castle Walls, which are the males. We've got a coral bark Japanese maple, which has done okay in this spot. I think it struggled a little bit. You can see a little bit of dead at the top, but I think we planted it super late last season. It's just kind of getting used to its spot now. So I'm hoping next year it'll really start to put on some growth and have those nice bright colors on the bark. There's 3 Diamond Lake hostas here, and then a bunch of violets mixed in because it's just such a weed in our area. But we've got the 3 Diamond Lake hostas here, which will really start to fill in this front area. And they did green out a little bit, but you can see the nice blue color that they do have. So I think next spring too, when they leaf out, they'll have more of that bluish color, especially for the first few months that they're leafed out. There are some, I think, Patriot hostas in the back over here. Not sure if we're going to keep those or remove them, but they're just there for now. We've got a cherry laurel. I think this is a variety called Volcano. The new growth is like a nice reddish orange color, and then eventually does fade to a green later on in the season. But nice evergreen, broadleaf evergreen for the shade. And then right here is a type of oak leaf hydrangea. I believe this is a variety called Alice, but I know that it's supposed to get about 6 to 8 feet tall and wide. And then one last honorable mention, this is not going to stay here for a while. We're eventually going to get rid of this light pole. I think we may even get rid of this sidewalk. I'm not entirely sure. I got to talk to my dad about what the plan is for this front area. But these here are Denim and Lace Russian Sage. So we planted these a couple years ago. They're looking really beautiful now, and we'll end up transplanting these somewhere else. So that's pretty much it for this video. There's a lot of stuff that's really starting to come into its own here at my dad's house, and a lot of stuff that I just planted at my mom's house. So it's still kind of in its infancy, but both gardens really are. And the next few years, stuff is really going to start to fill in, and I'm very excited to see how that process works. So besides that, I hope you guys like this video, and I will see you in the next one.